Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder and team leader of Streamlined Properties. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
If you are a real estate investor or just interested in getting started and you've listened to this show, you probably know what midterm or medium-term rentals are. And we're going down that rabbit hole today with my guest, Jamie Banks. She's going to talk to you all about radiating real estate through medium-term rentals, and her journey has been quick. It's been very few years and a lot of units. She's dabbled on her own and with co-hosting. She's going to give you some great tips. Let's get to it. This is episode 138 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Jamie Banks. Jamie is a medium-term rental and multifamily real estate investor. She has quickly become an MTR expert with more than 20 properties managed. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, well, I think it's been a quick journey. When was the first time you started getting interested in real estate?
So I closed on my first investment property January of 2023. So,
wow, okay. This is quick. I love doing this because it lets other people know, like, whatever age you are or wherever you're at, you can start and then get going. So let's hear your story. This is awesome.
No, exactly. So I'll go back a few years to 2018. So graduated college, I actually started my career in commercial lending. So my first job out of college was in a 2-year rotational program where I did 3 different rotations, all within essentially commercial real estate. And so my first job out of college, I was helping underwrite and originate multifamily agency loans, which are for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and FHA. And so that was my first job out of college, touring 200 and 300 unit apartment buildings to understand, if we would lend, understand risk. And so I definitely got a view of real estate from that realm. Did a few other positions in commercial real estate, underwriting, portfolio management, worked under a credit officer who was the one approving or not approving the real estate deals. And then a few years later, I went over to Fundrise, which is like a larger commercial real estate operator, and did asset management and multifamily for them. So definitely think that, being in those different roles within that journey, I found out like, hey, I think I can do this. And this is kind of cool. And so I really just started raising my hand for projects that I knew would give me the skills that I needed to eventually do it myself. So I remember asking my manager, it's like, hey, can I be the asset manager for the entire multifamily portfolio? And he kind of looked at me. He was like, the 14,000 units? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, sure. And so I did that.
Not a lot of people raising their hand to take on that. So
exactly. I think he was like scratching his head, like, what's going on here? And so, but for me, it was amazing because I was managing, I think it was about 29 multifamily assets, 14,000 units total because they were all 200 plus units. I actually had a 503 unit that we asset managed too. So huge, buildings, and really was able to learn, the ins and outs of asset management, underwriting, property management, through those positions.
Yeah, going back to the first time you started underwriting, in your first job, at that time, did you see that as something that you could do? Because I know a lot of people who work in real estate related fields, when they're starting, they're like, well, those people must be able to do it, but I can't do it. When did that change? When you realized like how long in the process?
Oh, that's a great question. It took years because at first I remember I was horrible at it. Like I understood it because, everyone kind of understands living in apartment buildings, but I'm like, what is leverage? What is, these LTV versus LTC? Like, why do we underwrite? I remember for the first year, didn't even really understand the word underwriting.
Yeah.
Like I knew that I was analyzing, I knew that I was researching, but I'm like, what is this underwriting thing? So it really took, I think, being an asset manager, so moving from my first job after 3 years back to a commercial real estate role where, I went from a large bank that had 40 plus thousand people, was working at their headquarters, to essentially a startup that
Yeah.
had, I think I was number 230. And so really being able to thrive in that role, especially with startups, usually have a lot more roles than just at being at a larger organization where you're, one of many. I realized like, hey, I think I can do this. And I don't even know if I thought I could do it from an investor standpoint. I just knew I was like, okay, at least I'll buy a investment
Yeah.
property,
Yeah.
before I'm 30, or, I had this far off goal, but it definitely had no way of knowing how, things would turn out.
Yeah, and growing up, was real estate even a thing in your mind, or were you just focused on, getting through school, getting a job?
So I think yes and no. So my mom has always rented. And so I remember hating every year or two having to
Moving.
move, right?
Yeah.
Because you're usually kind of capped at, the rental amount. And I grew up in Baltimore. And so Baltimore had a lot of similar properties. So we might move to the one next door.
Right.
And so I remember hating that. Like, dang, I think, I would think in my mind, like, oh, if we just had something, we didn't have to move, it would be great. And then my grandfather actually and my grandmother had like a really sizable portfolio in Dover, Delaware, in which my grandfather, he's 92, he still runs it today.
Yeah.
And so seeing the power of real estate kind of from their perspective, and then seeing how, this transitory lifestyle from being a renter, I think one of my goals was always to buy the house I lived in.
Yeah.
And so I always had that kind of in the back of my mind. And also I loved HGTV and flipping. So I think it just kind of took a while to put the pieces together, but definitely the passion was there.
Yeah, and I think if you look at your trajectory, you used your job to get leverage as an investor. Of course, you were in a real estate field, but still, I think there's a lot of people who aren't using what they're doing, thinking it's going to be advantageous to them, in real estate investing. Like I was an attorney. That means I've been a negotiation expert. Like these things can play a role. You, of course, had a little bit advanced on the underwriting, but still, it's not like you're going to walk out and buy 500 units right away. You had to shrink the underwriting to something smaller when you got started, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then I even like the connections that I made, like it was actually one of my mentors, and Matt Faircloth's one is in the Rosa Group, is like my mentors. And I remember meeting Matt at BPCon, and him she was introducing me and was talking about she worked for Fundrise, she can do this. And I was like, I can? And I was like, well, I just actually read Matt's book. I'm like, well, if he says it, I guess it has to be. It has to be true. But then even since I've, circled back with coworkers and they're like, you're so smart, you've done this. And I'm like, yeah, I have. So I think I still, get the imposter syndrome a bit. But when I step back and look at it from a perspective of, how I was looking at it when I was an underwriter and none of my money was on the line, or my private investors' money, I think is looking at it the same way. I'm like, hey, we successfully underwrote transactions, exited transactions. I've been in different real estate cycles. I was in the COVID boom where we were getting 20 to 30% trade outs on, products that we hadn't been updated in 10 to 13 years.
Yeah.
And so it's also interesting too, because I used to really study trends in multifamily because it was an environment where no one knew what was going to happen. I remember in 2020, CoStar, it's really a popular way to kind of pull multifamily stats. They were projecting 20 and 50% vacancy, where you think on a 200 unit building, half the people aren't going to move out, right? Especially in
where are they going?
Price. Exactly. Where, I don't know. I didn't get that far in the report, but just realizing that it's definitely been a really interesting real estate market. And then as I started realizing that I was ready to jump in and really ready to be an investor, I didn't wait on the sidelines to say, oh, I'm gonna wait for prices to do this or wait for interest rates to do that. I'm just going to jump in. And if the numbers work, which I think I really got from my prior position, where if the interest rate is 22%, but the deal works and it cash flows and it meets your KPIs, do the deal.
Yeah. That's really good advice. And I think, talking about imposter syndrome, I think like a little bit of that is okay because it's motivational. It's just when imposter syndrome is like the thing that's dragging you down. But then you get people like I've had both Matt and Liz on the show, and they're great connectors as well as great in terms of what they do in real estate. But by them saying, like, hey, here's Jamie, she can do this. Then you're like, oh, wait, you're saying to yourself, like, I think I can do this. And then your colleagues are telling you. And then the imposter syndrome, it's always still going to be around the higher you go. But I think that's healthy. How do you feel about that?
Oh, definitely. Like one of my the quotes I live by is be scared and do it anyway. Like
Yeah,
I
that's good.
love to travel, but a lot of people don't know I'm severely claustrophobic. And so I have like a little panic attack every time I get on a plane.
Yeah.
But I'm getting on a plane Saturday to go to San Diego.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not gonna not go. And
Yeah,
so,
you're balancing the things that the reward for getting there. Yeah, I'm not a big. Everyone's like, oh, do you like traveling? I'm like, no, I like the destination. I don't enjoy the traveling part. I don't know
yeah,
why anyone would. It's terrible. I just want to
exactly.
get there. Once I'm there, I'm like, wow, that wasn't that bad. But it's like that kind of lead up to thing, and I think that plays into real estate investing. If you look at new investors or you think back on your journey, you're scared of the unknown. You're like trying to figure out how to do multifamily on a very small scale. And then you go on the internet and you don't know, I mean, who's telling the truth here? How did you start to wade your way through? Obviously, you had experts at your job, which helped, but how did you turn it into real life connections with other investors that were outside of your business where you were working?
So I have to shout out 30 Day Stay by Deanna and Sarah, like that
Yeah.
Bigger Pockets published, because that's really how I got started. I remember, I think I listened to maybe both of them on
Yeah.
the Bigger Pockets podcast, and I was like, let me just get this book. It was my first Bigger Pockets book,
Yeah.
and I read it, and just the way that it was broken down, the way that it was step by step. I read the book once, and I went back and then read it again,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I found my agent through Bigger Pockets who actually had just read the book. And so he knew exactly about medium term rentals because I think,
Yeah.
especially a year ago, it was still, a new asset class. And
Yeah.
so I joined the local meetup. That was that's right up the street for me. And so I actually met my mentor at the first one, which was my goal. And she's helped me, just tremendously from mindset. Like she calls me on my mindset all the time.
Yeah.
Like, why did you say that? Don't say that. Like you're putting a limit on yourself, or, told me that like sometimes I struggle with imposter syndrome, or even just doing like what she calls an identity shift, like going from being an employee who was trying to climb the corporate ladder,
Yeah.
who wasn't that happy, to being an entrepreneur. Now I have employees and people counting on me, and it's definitely a lot different. And so I think like having the mentor and then also just starting to talk to people who are my same age, like in their 20s, maybe in their 30s, who had 200 units. And I'm like, wow, really?
Yeah.
And really just seeing that people who, look like me and you and, all different, spectrums of the rainbow,
Yeah.
could do it. And so I think, definitely being a minority and that there isn't that many people of color who are in the space, I think definitely propelled me forward. Because I actually work part-time for a nonprofit that helps minority students get into corporate careers. And I've been doing that for a few years.
Yeah.
I mentor a few hours a week. And I think for them too, when I started telling them like, hey, I'm quitting my job to buy my own real estate. And they're like, you can do that? And I'm like, yeah, you can. And so just showing them too, like being a CEO or of a corporation, because that was my goal. I wanted to be a CEO. I don't even know why. Or being a CFO.
Yeah, when you get there, you're like, well, I mean, this isn't that much fun.
Exactly. But, climbing the corporate ladder is a goal for so many. But I'm like, it doesn't have to be. You can go, you can stack your money, you can house hack, you can do these different things and then go off on your own or start something part-time. And there's definitely different ways to really pivot into real estate.
Yeah, I mean, going back on the book, I've had Ziana and Sarah on. Right after the book came out, I had them both on, and it was still pretty new. Like I was familiar with that because I've been doing short term my whole life, but it was kind of like an interesting concept that very quickly blew up because the travel nurses were like doing it, still as COVID was ending. So I think, and I know you're friends with James Wong, and his episode came out today while we're recording, and he was saying like it was a very small community then of people who were trying to get into MTR, which is now of course mushroomed into something bigger. But you guys were all kind of learning at the same pace and figuring out between each other like, hey, how can we do this and in what areas? Do you think now, I mean, to me, MTR is really doable in almost any area because it's not just hospitals now that people, it's kind of what people thought in the beginning.
Yeah, so well, one, like connecting with James definitely helped. We connected almost a year ago now, like via Facebook. And then we have very, very similar business styles. We have similar mindsets. Sometimes
Yeah.
I just like text him for a pick me up, like, I don't know if I can do this. And he's like, yes, you can. And,
Yeah.
vice versa. So
Yeah.
it's definitely great having friends in the space who are doing, very similar things. But actually, so I've been in 8 markets, some big, some very, very small.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that MTRs can work in any market. One thing that I do that I actually got from, I say, the corporate world is anytime that we closed on, a 200 unit mortgage or I'm blanking on the word now. We close
Yeah.
on like a debt product. We would do a business plan, right? We would make sure, even as the lender, we would want to understand where is this asset going to go. And so that's one thing that I do for any MTR that I've ever owned. I've arbitraged one. I've co-hosted a few. And I always have a business plan because I need to know what or who is the ideal tenant for that asset, right? And so like my first property that I bought as an investment property is in West Philadelphia. If you heard Fresh Prince of Bel-Air,
Born and raised.
Exactly.
I can hear it. I hear it get going. Yeah.
Exactly. And honestly, where my property is might be where he was born and raised,
Yeah.
because it's a C market, solid C market. But I've done incredibly well there by targeting people in insurance companies where people in the community's house may catch on fire, might
Right.
flood, especially in Philadelphia because they're row homes. If one home catches on fire,
Great
unfortunately, it's gonna impact the adjacent homes.
Right. If not
And
from
so,
actual fire, the smell of the smoke because of the row home situation. Yeah.
exactly, it makes them unlivable. And sometimes it goes down the row, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's not even just the 2 adjacent properties, but I've, housed people who are from the neighborhood. They don't care about the neighborhood. They're from the neighborhood.
Right.
I've also housed, a lot of like male medical professionals who are traveling with pets, or it's definitely a place maybe, as a single female, you might not want to be, but as a couple or, and I just, for me, really honing down on who is the ideal tenant has really helped me because now I know how to market it, right? Which is through our listings.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's marketing, right? If you read it and you're like, this fits me, or I make it known that I accept, company checks from insurance relocation agencies where some people might not,
Right.
want to go kind of off Airbnb, you're not supposed to, but, making that known has really, helped me. But like on the other side, I house hack and I rent my room to a travel medical professional. That is my really only, I can't say, hey, you can't live here because you're not a travel medical professional, but really my listing is apparent because it's, I'm sharing the home. Me and my husband share the home and rent a room in our house. And so we really want someone who's at work most of the time, right?
Yeah.
Who has a job, and when they're home, they're asleep. Not someone who, I remember I had someone, because I always have an interview and they're like, how many guests can I have? I don't know if they said at once or something. I was just like, oh, this is not the house.
Yeah, zero, goodbye.
Zero, sorry. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so really just doing that business plan to understand who is meant to stay there, what companies. I launched a product in New Orleans, which is, and I would say it's C+ neighborhood, but it's very, very close to the French Quarter, like less than 8 minutes. And so it's perfect for digital nomads. And so like we set up desks with, I always put in each of my properties an actual monitor because I've been working from home since 2020.
Yeah.
And the monitor, the mouse, the keyboard, and then the HDMI. I like to have it so someone can come to the property and just hook up.
Yeah.
And so like things like that, I'm really targeting now the travel, like the digital nomad or someone who's working from home and who just wants to enjoy New Orleans for a month, right? And so I also have a large yard that is perfect for pets. And so really just understanding who is the ideal guest, right? My ideal guest isn't a family. It isn't someone who has, multiple kids. It's not very kid friendly. And so really just understanding, my ideal guest to a T is really important. It's really kind of helped me succeed in different markets and different property types. Just for context, I've managed everything from a room rental to 5-bedroom condos to house to quad. So definitely just different, size properties.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic point. I mean, I think understanding who your ideal avatar is really, really important. And I think that some newer investors or even experienced investors think that they may be like losing money because they're going to miss it. But that's not, if it's not your ideal tenant, that means you have the potential for more complaints. So
Mhm.
driving a product to someone who you really want, especially, of course, when it's your own home, but knowing like, hey, this is what I want, and driving the advertising and marketing around that, I think it's smart to push off the other people. Like, this isn't for families. No offense, I like families, but like this property is not for you. And I think short term and midterm succeed now, especially in this environment, by being tighter on who the avatar is, because then you're going to have way less problems with people saying, like, hey, I didn't know West Philly was like this. And it's like, well, you shouldn't have come from Belgium and just picked this because you thought everything in Philadelphia was the same.
Hmm. Yeah, you definitely shouldn't have. Yeah. And I've had real conversations. I actually housed two professors from the UK. They came, it was last summer, to teach at UPenn. And I just let them know. Like, I gave them, once I did all my checks and stuff, I gave them the address and I said, hey, I actually do a video tour. So I gave them
Yeah,
a video tour.
important.
And just saying, so they knew the neighborhood, right? I'm not saying that it's good or bad. I lived there for 2 weeks. It's
Right.
perfectly fine.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm just letting there's a lot of people who maybe don't have jobs in certain, blocks and areas. And I also, when I put together my guidebook, I make sure that I'm, sending them to the best grocery store, right? Not the West Philly grocery store, because actually across the street is Upper Darby, PA, PA, which is like a B neighborhood. And so I send them over there for a lot of things. Yeah. One, it's better to park, because when you're in cities, you're usually having a parallel park. It's one way. Two, it's more maybe family friendly, and maybe it's if you're going at night, you definitely want to go to the Upper Darby store, because one, Philly is Philly. Even if you're in the best parts, there's police, there's people outside, there's riffraff. And I've realized that I've been to Philly a few times in different areas, and I'm like, this isn't just West Philly. This is all Philly.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just talking cities, I mean, you grew up in Baltimore. Cities change so quickly. You can be on one block and you're like, wow, this is looking good, and then you turn the block and you're like, there's 4 burned out buildings that have been there for 10 years, and you're like, wow. I mean, how is this? That exists in a lot of cities, and understanding the city dynamics as an investor is really, really important, especially in a place like Philly or Baltimore, or even here in New Jersey. There's towns where you have to know, like Newark is huge. Like, it's not a small area. You need to know which is a maximization for your investment. And like I said, we're not saying whether it's good or bad. Everybody grew up a certain way. So I don't know what somebody's comfortable with, but sending them a video is just a fair way of saying, like, hey, this is what it looks like, because you don't want people to be surprised. You want them to be excited when they get there and say, like, wow, it looks just like the pictures or better, and happy with the location.
Exactly. And I think, because one of my, items of due diligence that I do, so I was co-hosting over 20 properties. I ended up stepping back, and we can talk about that a little later, kind of why I stepped back. But part of my process was to have my runner, who usually is an intern in every market. I like getting college students because they have more flexible availability, to walk the block. Yeah. Now in Philadelphia, you have to walk 5 blocks.
Yeah, exactly.
It's change, right? Where I live in Northern Virginia, very much probably A-class area. I think the last crime we had in January, they were stealing Cadillac converters, which is I'm in Baltimore, that's not a crime.
Yeah, right. That's for babies. Yeah,
exactly. They were outraged, and so exactly, area is different. So my area, you probably don't have to just walk the circle, just so if there's anything immediate, right? You have to do different due diligence for, again, Philly, Baltimore, New Jersey, even New York, these larger cities, versus I operated for a bit in Terre Haute, Indiana, which is a very, very small town. If you walk 5 blocks, you're probably still on the same property, because there's a lot more land, right? Yeah. And so just understanding how that due diligence differs, depending on the property type in the area.
Yeah, and also, you said before, understanding who's coming there. Like in West Philly, if you're renting to insurance people who had a flood, 2 blocks over, they're good. They know the area, but coming from the UK is going to be a different story and a different setup. Again, I mean, don't you think that a lot of MTR specifically, but also this applies to short term, is being proactive and preventing the things in the future that are going to become a hassle for you? Because as a manager, the last thing you want is all the calls. So you're trying to set everybody up so their expectations are met, so you don't get any calls and you just get a good review and everybody's happy.
No, exactly. And that's why I provide videos, because photos, even so, my West Philly townhome, the bathroom's on the 2nd floor. That is very, very important. That is very important, especially even if you have someone visiting who maybe has mobility issues, just to know you have to go, steps to use the bathroom. And so just like understanding that is important. And that's like why I provide videos. Cause I definitely agree with being proactive. It's like the goal, and most of my MTR guests have extended. Now, I've also had guests who have gotten there and who have been like, oh, this is a little different than what I thought. And so the first time that happened, I was, it was going to be the last. And that's when I started recording videos. And there's even times I've seen, especially in Philly, where even travel medical professionals, they'll stay in a hotel for a week and then want to go see the properties, right? Especially ones who are coming from maybe small towns. I had one come from Kansas, right? Like Philly's, and I think she actually ended up staying in a hotel because she's like, I don't like any of these places. Yeah. Philly's scary. And I'm like, Philly is kind of, can be scary, sure. Right? Or and so just understanding that, like, as you're saying, it's just better to be proactive and it's better to be completely honest, right? I'm going to answer all questions right now. Like when people are like, hey, is it safe? Well, I can say, like, I've stayed in all of my properties. I've been there at night, at 11 p.m., 1 a.m., finishing furnishing. So I can say, hey, I was there at 1 a.m. with my husband. We were, we left our car outside, got the car, we were perfectly fine, right? And because again, it's all going to be open to interpretation, but just giving, the facts or saying, hey, well, maybe this isn't the best place, or, maybe you should try Center City. That sounds a bit more of like, as a neighborhood in Philly. Center City might be
different vibe.
Yeah, right. It's a lot different. And so, because I want someone to be there for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, versus coming and then leaving in a month because it, maybe didn't meet their expectations.
Yeah. Hey, it's Jonathan. This is just a brief interlude to talk to you about Deal Machine. Listen, I've used Deal Machine and I was crushing it with my Concerned Citizen postcard on Deal Machine. You can look that video up on my YouTube and find out how I did it. It works. Deal Machine works. I've had David Lecco, the CEO, on the podcast. So if you want a free trial of Deal Machine, the elite Driving for Dollars app, and I'm telling you, it works if you use it correctly, you can go to my link at bit.ly/Zen Deal Machine. Now, bit.ly is bit.ly/Zen Deal Machine. It's free and you'll be up and running in 2 minutes, and then you can figure out if you want to keep it. Let's get back to the show. I wanted to get your take on this because I think that the most obvious tenants for MTR are, of course, travel nurses. That's still going, maybe not as popular as during the pandemic, but still very, very popular. You have your insurance companies, which are great. They pay way too much. It's like, you're like, how much are you going to pay me? This is unbelievable. But I've always said that for real estate agents don't understand how valuable MTRs are, because right now we have a problem where people need to sell and buy. And sometimes they can do it at the same time, but they need a soft landing spot in the middle. And we used to say, oh, yeah, sure, short term. But now it's midterm. Sometimes you don't know when you're going to find the next house, but you'd like to cash out on your house and do really well. So you might need, a 3, 4, 5 month stay. You just put your stuff in a pod. Have you seen that coming around in the MTR community as an option?
Oh, definitely. So like relocations, or even like a grandparent or grandparents coming because, their child had a baby and they need to stay for a few months but want their own space. Another thing that I like to tell people is with hospitals, actually, so travel medical professionals in at least Philly and some other markets I'm in have significantly gone down, but there's also medical travelers who unfortunately have a loved one.
Yeah, for long-term care. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And I think even like being near cancer centers or being near centers that have research that people are there long term, a lot of times they don't necessarily have housing, or like Ronald McDonald houses, and they have those in certain areas. Yeah. But a lot of times they want a home, right? They don't even want a hotel. And so I think just people are more transitory now anyway. So they're relocating, or, they want to move to Philly, but they want to look at all the different neighborhoods, or like New Orleans. They love New Orleans, but it gets really, really hot. So they just want to come for a few months and maybe, look elsewhere. So I think there's definitely relocating people, there's displaced people, there's, students, grad students, families. We've gotten inquiries from, we had an MLB agent like reach out because, they're medium term travelers. When they were coming to the city, it was the Philadelphia Phillies. They needed someplace, I think it was 6 or 7 months for the season, and they were looking to rent it furnished. So there's so many, MTR guests, even besides the travel nurses, relocating, families or individuals.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your portfolio and what you started buying. After you started to get into it, what are the assets that you're particularly interested in, and why, as your journey, progressed along the way?
Sure. So now on my current portfolio, I have a condo that I live in that I house hack, 2 single-family homes. One's in Philadelphia, one's in New Orleans. I also have one co-host property left. It's a 4-bedroom house in it's in Winchester, Virginia, which is west kind of me, but it's not quite West Virginia yet. But right now I'm focused on buying multifamily. I essentially want to marry the experience I've had with multifamily as underwriter, asset manager with MTRs. And I think just as I've grown my network, where my goal is really to rent business to business, is to rent to an insurance relocation company, corporate relocation companies, medical agencies. And so as I've had those conversations and nurtured those relationships, I realized that a huge gap in the industry is, apartment buildings or having a bulk amount of inventory available for a client. So let's say if a condo building catches on fire or floods, right? They need 10, 20, 30, depending on the size of the condo building, units of almost the same size at the same time. It's really hard to find that inventory, right? And even a large apartment building might not have those many units available at a short period of time. And so my goal is to buy multifamily. I'm currently looking at 10 to 30 units and then convert 25% of the units to medium-term rentals and have them exclusively, furnished for clients. And then as, things grow or as I really, understand the demand, that might go up a bit, but I really think that there's a huge advantage. I've even seen it from my friend James about how they have a lot of units in a similar area. And so how you can move people, how you can say, hey, well, I have something down the street. And I have a few other friends who have properties in the same building or in the same area. And so that's really just kind of how I'm refocusing. I think too with operations, which is one of my favorite words. It definitely makes things, more seamless when you can have, maybe one cleaning closet or one cleaning crew, one, runner. Being in 8 markets, I had 8 different teams, which I think, really burnt me out even more than the properties. And so, and my focus really is to build like one core team, really get those system processes in place, and then, building my company to be vertically integrated and then manage all of the properties that we plan to acquire.
Yeah, I think it's really smart. I think clustering is always smart and very, very smart in all aspects of investing, but very important for midterm. If you have different units or somebody's like, oh, the sun's too hot in here and somebody else doesn't care, you can just move them around if you have more options. But management wise, it's just a whole lot easier to do that. But I think the lure of multifamily, and I've told this to people even on the smaller scale, even people who are just house hacking a 2-family, it's like, hey, you don't have to long-term rent that one. You can short-term or mid-term rent your other one and, 1.5 to 3x your potential rent. And, maintenance wise, you're there anyway. You put this into an apartment building, you're like, wow, okay, this really works. Maybe you have a super if you're 10 to 30 units. So you really have all the things in there, like you said, that help you vertically integrate the systems and provide an opportunity, like you said, for large scale, opportunities. Somebody's coming in for corporate, sometimes they're doing 2 months training or something like that. These are things that I don't think people thought of before that are really, really smart thoughts. So I think that model is really, really going to work. Do you have a location in mind, or are you saying like, hey, let the building find me that works with your underwriting skills and then we'll create the team?
So TBD, I was focused in Richmond, Virginia, but basically I was looking there actively for 5 to 6 months. And just some of the kind of like the general economics of the city didn't work well with my business plan. Another thing is there was a boom, I would say, of construction in 21, 22 when rates were just increasing astronomically. So there's a lot of new deliveries coming online. So there's a lot of new assets that I think in Richmond in particular, all the areas I was looking, there was new inventory coming online, which is going to be Class A, high rise, the
Right.
best amenities. And since I'm looking for like a Class B asset, which, would kind of be the direct, maybe not direct, but similar price points or, a bit lower than that asset class, I'm looking elsewhere. I'm actually kind of going back to the drawing board and using my underwriting skills now. And I have about 10 markets that I'm currently analyzing, and I'm going to narrow that down to one.
Yeah.
And then kind of go from there. Because for me, I analyze it, population growth, income growth, what you would look for a long-term investment. But then I'm also on the back end doing some analytics to understand if it would make, well, one, if the amount of units that I plan to bring online as MTRs, it will support it, right? Not all markets can support 5 or 10 units as MTRs. So kind of been fun, just like looking at different markets and figuring it out. And so once I get a market, I like to visit that market and we'll, start making some connections and viewing some properties.
Yeah, I think that's a very smart strategy for all investors, because I find that newer investors sometimes are like, oh, well, I'm looking at, 14 markets, and they want to look in all 14 markets. And it's like, well, that's not help. Do your due diligence to decide on the one that you really want, and then just go all in, because you can't be looking at deals every day from 10 markets. Like, you're not going to be effective, and no realtor's going to help you with that. Like, they're just like, well, you're looking at 10 markets. I have a 1 in 10 chance of getting, a sale here. It doesn't make sense. So I think that's really helpful advice to anyone who's starting in real estate investing, to like really hone in. I say it even city-wise here. People are like, I want a house hack, but I'll do it. How can you want a house hack in 4 different counties? Like, where you work and you know what you're looking for. Find the town that you want to live in. They're like, well, there's not a lot of inventory. Yeah, but that's where you want to be. So let's go see every piece of inventory that comes out. I think you're thinking larger scale, but I really think all the way down to like brand new single family homes, anything. This is what people need to do as well.
Oh, no, definitely. And I think that, I've seen the same thing with new investors wanting to look everywhere. I was like, one thing for me, like even in Richmond, the reason I decided to start looking elsewhere is because I looked at, either viewed or underwrote every deal that came to the market. From, I think the smallest thing I looked at was 8 units. The largest one was over 200 units, which was actually a lot of fun, but looked at everything. And so was really able to understand, okay, what's the price per unit? Because when you're looking at 20 units or 30 units, right, you really want to understand the price per unit, maybe not necessarily the, valuation or the purchase price that they have listed. And so, I also look at the cap rates. And I think really I was able to understand the Richmond market. So, and then I have everything and, that I've done, and I'm very organized. So I like to keep just a market analysis. So heck, maybe 2 years from now, once all that new inventory has come online and population growth, continues to increase, like the amount of growth, maybe I'll look again. And I already have that research. So I think like it's okay. Like it feels weird for me saying like I don't have a market, because I've always had, a market.
Yeah.
I'm in different markets, but part of that is I actually want to be an MTR guest myself and just travel to different cities. So New Orleans is one of my favorite cities, so that's honestly probably why I bought it there. And we got to actually pick that one up creatively. So really, it's fun using like the creative financing strategies along with MTR and kind of being creative on the acquisition and on the exit.
When you were spread out in 8 different markets, how were you finding these deals? Is it, trying to build a funnel? Because that's what you said burned you out. Like, it must be hard to try to build a little bit, just, realtor, cleaners, anything, and develop the relationships in 8 markets at the same time, which of course plays into what we were just saying. But how were you finding the deals, and was that part of what burned you out?
Well, yeah, so I wasn't buying in the 8 markets. It was only co-hosting. So I kind of did, I would say just opposite of where the client would find me, I would decide on the client and then pick the property. So I wasn't necessarily actively going to those markets.
Right.
I just had a hard time saying no, honestly, and had a bit of I always had like a limiting belief where, oh, this is my first client, I have to say yes, right? Yeah. And then just not understanding even the margins on co-hosting or property management can be, really small. And so, especially when you're operating a team remotely, having to pay that team, right? Like I can't just go drive by any of my properties, because all of my properties, except the one I live in, are, far away. And I also travel a lot. And so I have to pay someone to go, if it's vacant for a month, to just go ride by, collect the mail. And so just factoring those costs in, honestly, I wasn't making that much money. And I think too, being in that many markets, it's like there's going, especially with medium term, a good and a bad thing about it is there's longer Oh, there's longer bookings, there's longer reservations. But that also can mean that I might not have to reach out to my handyman or my cleaner for a few months. And
Yeah.
this was before I required monthly cleans. And part of that was one, have eyes on my unit. Two, just to kind of keep that cleaner engaged. Because I had amazing cleaning teams. And then the guests would be, going to be moving out in 2 weeks. And they just kind of ghosted me, right? I had to go find a new team. And so I realized too, it's like I did in those different markets had a few units. And so there was the kind of economies of scale that way. But even I think a lot of cleaners now are still kind of stuck on the short-term rental model. And not all of them are as familiar with the medium-term model. So they're going and they really want to work with the host and the managers who, have maybe 3 or 4 turnovers a week because they still have to, bring home their money and, feed their family as well. Where like working with medium term, someone who only has, 4 or 5 properties might not be worth their while, especially if they're trying to build a clientele where they have significant business.
Yeah, you snuck something in there that's really important, that the cleaners are your eyes on the prize there. That's an underknown fact, that if you're cleaning while they're there, it not only helps them, but it gives you a quick window like, hey, how's the first month going? Are there ants everywhere? Because like you said, sometimes a MTR, they just may not tell you anything, and then you come in and have to do repairs at the end because you thought everything was fine, but you just don't know what tenants think is important to tell you sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Or people live different ways, especially with furniture, right? Like if someone is smoking in the unit, they're going to leave evidence of that they were smoking in the unit, right? Or the cleaner can smell it. Sometimes people, I'm just going to air it out. No, but then the cleaner can come back and tell me, and then we can charge accordingly.
Yeah, you can't air it out, just in case anybody's thinking that's definitely not a thing. Yeah. So what's the biggest thing that you learned from co-hosting and those relationships? Because I think you said, one, the spread isn't as good as it seems, but how hard is co-hosting and what were the pros and cons of that for trying to kind of help people get it done?
So I would say that the biggest thing I learned, and I would say is, I don't know if it's a positive or negative, is like you have to vet the property as well as the host. It's sometimes hard being a manager. I think especially you got somebody who manages who cares, because there's property managers who don't.
Yes.
When there's something that I want to do for the property and I want to do it now, but the client might not say the same thing. And so I definitely would say, like, in a co-hosting relationship, in a relationship where any relationship really, but especially with co-hosting, really to define those roles in your co-hosting agreement to vet the client. I think I would have, at first, I was only having one conversation with the co-hosting client, not including when we first met, maybe, texting or messaging. But towards the end, I was having 4. And people who were getting to the 4th, by the end, not a lot of people were getting to the 4th just because I really understood what I wanted and didn't want. But on the plus side, I think co-hosting is an amazing way to learn and a low-cost way to learn, right? Or a low-cost way to operate more units. Because part of the reason I started co-hosting, and then also I do something called tenant placement, where I have leads but sourcing them from other people's properties, so I've kind of pre-vetted and approved, was that as I was growing connections, right? So in Philly, at the time I had a studio apartment that I arbitraged, and then also the property that I own in Philly. Well, both of them were rented within the first month. If someone calls me and I'm just like, call me back in 5 months, right? I hated saying no and losing that business. And so with co-hosting, I was able to acquire more units, which is $0 out of my pocket, right? Yeah. In fact, like I would charge a setup fee. So I'm, kind of making money. And that's one thing I wasn't at first. Yeah. Definitely charge, a setup fee, because, I was able to scale that way. I mean, I definitely have no regrets. I think one is like I can launch an MTR from anywhere. My first MTR, and obviously my house hack, I, was there to launch it. But my property in Philly, I haven't been to Philly in over a year. But it's kind of weird. I'm like, hey, how's your property doing? I'm like, I have pictures, I have videos. I even have friends who are investors who, if they're in West Philly, they'll just drive by and take a quick photo or video. Even my lawn guy will text me, he texts me, your tenant's not doing a great job taking out the trash. And I'm like, thanks, Lawn. His name's John. I call him Lawn John. Yeah. Thanks, Lawn John. Yeah. So, I'm always vocal with the vendors that I work with. And I'm just like, hey, when you're by, if you see anything, let me know. Like I got a new Wi-Fi installed and they let me know, like, hey, there's been a package here. Do you want me to put it in? And, ended up being the guest. But yeah, sure. So just being vocal, if someone's at the property, just asking them, to do things. And I think just like the team I need, I didn't have a runner right away. I would just have a cleaner and a handyman / woman. And so part of the reason I went with interns, they're usually a little cheaper and have flexibility, and aren't looking for something full time, because now between every clean and a guest moving in, I have what I call a quality control check, which is the intern or, runner in every market going in. I have a long detailed checklist, about 2 pages of one, making sure the cleaner did what the cleaner was supposed to do. Also, we leave a welcome basket with a gift. They're making sure that the heat or the air is on the appropriate temperature, especially if it's been vacant, and really just making sure that when the person comes in, I can ensure that my eyes and my kind of second assurance that everything is going to be okay when that guest walks in, because I typically pay them on average $25, right, for a drop-in, so not a lot. I'd rather pay them $25, $50 if they have to go do something and come back, right, than have a guest come in, especially through Airbnb, and say, nope, this is horrible, and then I lost out on a few $1,000s, right? So, those are just a few system things that I've incorporated from being in so many markets.
Yeah, I think runner and gophers are so important for investors, and there are a lot of people out there who have the hustle. That's a great move for a college student. Like, you just get $25. All you have to do is walk through, do a checklist, send a couple of pictures. You feel like you're helping someone, and you could catch something that could really be a problem for you. And then maybe it's, some type of bonus that they get because they just saved you from something else. I really like that idea. And I think the use of people who are also interested in investing, there's a lot of people who are always like, hey, I'd like to learn. I don't know if I have any skills. It's like, do you have time? Do you have a gopher time available just once in a while to swing by? You usually do. And then they can at least get, you're giving them the opportunity. They can ask some questions. And then it's more of a win-win relationship instead of just people asking like, hey, how can I do midterm rentals? Like, that's very wide question. I don't know what your finances are, so how can I help you?
Right. No, exactly. And it's funny you said that, because that's actually what I do is I give a bonus. If it's a successful check-in, and 24 hours after the guest checks in, if there hasn't been any complaints, and we always send them a welcome message, the morning of, just to kind of check in, they get $25 more. So for a college kid, they're getting $50 basically for my assurance. But, one thing I do is I charge an admin fee that covers that $50 plus a little bit more. And so, even those numbers and things, like when I was co-hosting, I was paying for that. That was a service I provide, not a service that I was billing to my clients. And so that might cut into my margins if I'm getting 20% of a $2,000 rent, right? And so really just, I think I made a great financial decision. And I think co-hosting has definitely helped me learn to do things and not do things, as I continue to build an MTR business.
Yeah. So, Jamie, if a new investor came up to you and they said, let's consider their finances are vetted, they have enough money to get a property that could work, and they said, should I get into midterm rentals as a first investment? What would you tell them?
Yes. I'm actually 100% MTR right now.
Yeah.
Planning to diversify, but I would say yes. But I would say that make sure the money that you have is the down payment, is the financing, is the cost of acquiring that property, however you plan to do it, and furnishing with quality furnishings, because that's a huge thing. Where I did a refresh in my Philly property because I ran out of money. Like I think I spent $12,000. I had budgeted like $7,000, and I'm like, listen, we just gotta get the blanket, get whatever blanket we can from Home Goods, right? And so things like that. I definitely would say get into medium term rentals, but I would say educate yourself. I mean, like, I've done podcasts. Sierra and Sarah have done podcasts. The Wire for ladies, Grace and Amelia, that have a lot of medium term rental content, like binge content. That's actually what I did.
Sure.
Like, I remember reading 30 Day Stay, like looking up Ziana and Sarah, listening to every podcast they were on. And I'm like, okay, I've learned all I can. Let me go do it. And so I definitely think that another thing is to join Facebook groups. There's tons of, Facebook groups of other medium term investors. I think, you might find some at your local meetup, but just hearing from other people like in your market is definitely helpful, especially to understand the numbers. Because I think that there are certain numbers, like maybe the utility bills, maybe the cost of labor in that market, the cost of assembly, cleaners in that market, right? Those are costs that you want to know before you close on that transaction and incorporate it into your underwriting. But it's really hard to get unless you have, kind of another operator that in that market.
Yeah. And so your company, Radiate Real Estate, what do you guys do there, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so we're vertically integrated, so we manage my properties, also provide a lot of education through consulting and then also through digital products. And I'm actually just launched a mentorship to help
Awesome.
MTR investors. One thing that I've been doing is I keep track of all my analytics, all the requests I've gotten, all the leads that I've gotten and confirmed bookings. So in all the 8 markets I was in, I actually have pricing data and then what I just call it the MTR multiple. So like in Philly, believe it or not, we're getting 4 times long-term rent pretty consistently.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
really
so
good.
yeah,
Isn't
my
the
West Philly
average
townhouse.
like 1.7 or something?
I would say because I'm doing mostly B2B, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
2.5.
Right. Because
I would say
insurance
two to
pays
three
more.
times.
Yeah, yeah.
I would say like 2 to 3 times is kind of what we're seeing consistently. But then in more high cost markets, maybe New York, maybe New Jersey, it's not going to be as high because the rents are already as high. So,
Yeah.
one, we really just offer resources, and I like to tell everyone my mistakes, like tell everyone all the times that I've had lockouts and what I've done and how I've overcome them. And so really my goal is really to inspire the next, MTR investors and, offering products and services for that.
Awesome. And they can find that at radiatere.com and you on Instagram at Jamie Banks Real Estate, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I'm really glad we got in touch, and I think you provided great info and insight on MTR and really gave hope to people who may be like, that's something I'd like to do. I don't know how to get into it. I think you just dropped a roadmap for them how to get in. Other than going to work for the companies, they can take whatever jobs they're doing and figure out how to do it. Like you said, binge the content and then also, take up the learning yourself, meet other people like you did. And those people that you met early on are ones that are really like the ones that you rely on now in terms of like, hey, we can bounce ideas off each other, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to staying in touch.
You as well. Yeah, thank you. Have a great rest of your week.
All right. That was Jamie Banks. I'm Jonathan Green. We'll see you next episode. Wait. You have reached the end of the show. This is the part where you're going to get ready to check out, but I've actually changed this part. For over 120 episodes, you heard the same thing. Well, now I've changed it. I've thought about doing intros to the next episode, but I'm going to hold off on that for now. These are my pitches at the end. I've got nothing to sell you at all, but I do want to remind you that it really would help us if you support the podcast in the right way. All that means is subscribing to the podcast so you get it on Monday and Thursday, writing us a 5-star review if you believe that we deserve a 5-star review, sharing it with your friends, and being a participant in the Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing community. Soon there's going to be a new website launched. Maybe when you're listening to this, it's already going to be out there. That's where we're going to have collaboration. You're going to be able to see a lot from the guest. It is coming soon, and I just want to tell you, from me to you, I don't know how I got here, over 100 episodes. I'm so appreciative of you listening to the podcast and especially sticking around to hear this part. We'll see you next episode.